Sorry. Yeah, I know.
We're all a little older than we were, but now we're going to get a lot younger.
No, speak for yourself.
Now we're going to get a lot younger.
Jim Taylor.
Sure. Good to see you. How you doing?
We actually had a few people make flag. Incredible.
It works.
On a cloudy June morning, this handful of Vietnam vets gathered at the Little Creek Amphibious Base. Some had dug out old uniforms packed away in steamer trunks in the attic for a quarter of a century. Some had come thousands of miles just to be here.
Acres. Come on in here, gallant surfer. Or kamikaze kamaina, as we call him. We're both Hawaiian guys. Tim Guard.
The attraction was not just seeing each other again, but these two small boats. A chance for one last mission, one final patrol.
I'm ready to go on a swift boat. Let's do it.
I think you're going to be on one.
I cry when you look at these things, don't you?
This is a swift boat. Technically, it's a PCF, or fast patrol craft. Even the guys who served on them called them ugly little boats. There are only two left now, the last reminders of a little-known chapter in Navy history during America's most unpopular war, Vietnam. This is the story of a unique reunion of shipmates who depended on each other for their very lives, and also a reunion of those shipmates with these ugly little boats, which took them in harm's way and then back out again. To most of us, the war in Vietnam is late 60s history, but Americans had been fighting and dying there for a decade. It began as an effort to help an ally beat back a guerrilla threat and, in the thinking of the day, stop the spread of communism. It was one of those brushfire wars that strategists expected, spawned by the Cold War standoff between the superpowers. Americans were there to provide the tools and training for the South Vietnamese to fight their fight. U.S. involvement grew slowly but steadily until 1964, when an incident at sea prompted a huge increase. On August 2, 1964, the destroyer Maddox was attacked by 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. 2 were sunk in the battle.
The destroyer was carrying out a mission of patrol in those waters, in international waters, when it was attacked.
President Lyndon Johnson issued a stern warning that such incidents would not be tolerated.
And as I think you know, he's issued instructions that in the event of a further attack upon our vessels in international waters, we are to respond with the objective of destroying the attackers.
2 nights later, one of the most controversial incidents in the war. The Maddox, another destroyer, the Turner Joy, and Navy aircraft fought a 3-hour battle with what they believed were 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats. To this day, it's unclear if they actually existed, or if the radar returns were caused by unusual atmospheric conditions. Afterwards, even the captain of the Maddox wasn't sure. But Washington was sure, and at 10:36 p.m. on August 4th, President Johnson spoke on national radio and television.
It is my duty to the American people to report that renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
The reply was an air attack on North Vietnamese torpedo boat bases. 17 boats were sunk or heavily damaged. Oil storage facilities were destroyed. 2 American planes were lost. 3 days later, with only 2 dissenting votes, Congress approved the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Some called it a near declaration of war. The U.S. was on its way into Vietnam. The Navy realized its massive blue water fleet wouldn't work in the coastal waters and rivers of Vietnam. In fact, nothing in its inventory was quite right. So it converted World War II landing craft for use in the rivers as troop carriers, supply and command ships, and heavily armed monitors. For the shallowest rivers and canals, it had nothing at all. So with only a few modifications, the Navy bought 31-foot fiberglass cabin cruisers, which became the legendary PBRs, river patrol boats. With jet pumps instead of propellers, they could operate in as little as a foot of water. Stewart Seacraft of Louisiana built a 50-foot aluminum vessel to take workers to offshore oil drilling rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. It became the PCF, the swift boat used to patrol the coasts.
They were great little boats. Stewart had 40 days to bring them into shape to go to Vietnam. And in 40 days, they made the modifications, gun tubs, the whole works. And they got 5 or 6 of them ready that quickly.
PCFs 1 and 2 were used for training in Coronado, California. Very little was ever changed on the boats, and these two are basically in vintage 1965 condition.
I sent some guys from View Ships down, and those guys in View Ships said, "What do you want to change on them? How about some armor?" We said, "Hell no. We don't want anything to slow us down. When we get in trouble, we want to run."
But these vets, called Swifties with their own unauthorized call signs, did have to make some small modifications.
One of our crew members was an artist, and he drew Snoopy on his doghouse as our mascot. And I wrote home to my folks, and they got permission from Charles Schultz, and they made up a pennant for us and sent it over, and that's the same pennant that flew from our boat in Vietnam. And he watched over us and kept us out of harm's way.
And then it was time for the music of the engines, the smell of diesel fuel, and the rush of 850 horsepower they hadn't felt in a quarter of a century.
I suppose the first thing I had forgotten was how very loud and noisy they were. When the boats accelerated and the noise level went up and the throb of the engines increased, just the rush of adrenaline that comes with that came back quickly.
For the Swifties, it was a labor of love. The last river run wound its way up the Chesapeake Bay and Potomac River to deliver Swift Boat 1 to the museum at the Washington Navy Yard.
It's like coming home. I mean, it's a feeling right here.
They served us well, we pushed them hard, and I don't think they ever let us down. There's been very little written about swift boats. Not too many people know a lot about them, but for those of us who served on the boats are very special.
And the crews were special too, different from the spit and polish formality of the bigger ships. There were only 5 or 6 men aboard.
It was such a compact group that everybody watched everybody else's backside, and everybody else knew everybody else's jobs, from guns to driving to ship handling, you name it. And we watched out for each other. We were a family. Frank didn't mean very much on the boats at all. You know, we all did everybody else's job. We all knew everybody's job, and we watched out for each other.
You become like a group of brothers. I mean, there is no rank anymore. You're not a lieutenant and 5 enlisted guys. You're 5 people surviving and pulling together.
I think everybody is able to give their life for someone else, but there's that 1 second when you have to think about it. And with these guys, there was no thought. It just happened automatically.
Unfortunately, in the waters of Vietnam, it happened all too frequently. There's nothing like a Navy homecoming, and when it's the day before Thanksgiving, the celebration's even more joyous. But this time, the USS Lemoore County brought back more than homesick sailors. Tucked safely inside the tank landing ship, the last 2 swift boats. PCFs 1 and 2 had been in Panama, sharing the canal with massive freighters and commercial ships.
The main reason we had them down in Panama was the training of international students from Central and South America, Caribbean nations.
At Little Creek, the swift boats were checked out for their final mission. The crews came up from Panama, except for Neil Clark, who's based at Little Creek, an original Swiftie from the Vietnam days. It had been 25 years, but for Neil, it might just as well have been yesterday when he last fired the 81mm mortar.
With this particular type, you could load the shell almost horizontally, gently let it slide down the back. Say, for example, we wanted to take out a bunker on this narrow little river. You bring it around and sort of guesstimate what the range was. You got relatively good at this after a while. And you take and trigger fire it. Shell would go out, and all it is just the charge on the end of the shell will get out there so far with enough velocity, it would actually skip, just like you skip a rock across the pond.
Is that right?
Same exact thing.
And that's how you take out something that...
You might take out something that close. If you didn't take them out, it'd make them real nervous.
I bet you would. These 50-foot boats were often home for 6 men for days at a time. So actually, you had pretty much, if not all the comforts of home, at least some semblance thereof. You've got a little galley, I see.
Right, there's a little galley here. We had coffee pots, of course, and a cook stove of sorts, and a broiler under it. You can warm up some soup or whatnot. Little refrigerators down below here.
Did everybody have their own bunks, or did you hot bunk?
No, we hot bunk. We traded off. Because, of course, you're out on patrol or something. And,
somebody's awake anyway.
Somebody's awake. There's 4 bunks forward and these 2 aft here.
So did you cross-train for everything?
No, we cross-trained for everything you had to. If we lost a gunner on that aft gun, the engineer was the assistant gunner. You inherited the gun.
The first swift boats arrived in Vietnam in October 1965. The coast of Vietnam was like a giant sieve through which the North shipped supplies to the Viet Cong at will. Trawlers and junks laden with munitions mixed easily with the thousands of innocent civilian vessels.
So we did a lot of boarding and searching of junks and fishing junks and larger junks that were transiting the area going to market. And that's how the name derived, market time.
Market time divided the entire coast of South Vietnam into patrol zones. The outer areas were handled by Navy destroyers and large Coast Guard cutters. 84 swift boats eventually worked the shallower waters, backed up by 26 82-foot Coast Guard patrol boats. Overhead, Navy patrol planes looked for infiltrators. 5 coastal surveillance centers coordinated the patrols. This Navy film shows how it all worked.
3-2, this is Coast Watcher. A small cargo junk has just departed the beach. This contact is unidentified. Proceed to intercept, over.
Coast Watch, this is Red Baron 3-2. Roger, break. We'll intercept, over.
Set general quarters, prepare to board and search.
This was always a very dangerous situation because you never knew what to expect when you came alongside. You always had to be prepared for the worst. So you were always at full battle conditions with the guns manned and all the small arms distributed. And you would just look them over very carefully as you approached and made sure you could see everyone, that no one was trying to hide. You went aboard, you physically searched the boat, usually with at least 2 people, depending on the size of the junk. In most cases, they were just going about their business.
And then the trading would start. Swifties became world-class traders.
You could trade for fresh fish, shrimp. I remember in one case, we gave them a number 10 can of peas, we happened to have. So they were very pleased with that. Yeah. You had to make sure the barbecue was aboard. So we could always barbecue steaks or shrimp or fish.
And that's the way most boardings went. But occasionally, as in these pictures from Lee Fry, the Swifties hit pay dirt and captured weapons and supplies. And there were firefights. This swift boat was shot up in what might have been the first battle of the Tet Offensive in 1968. But mostly it was repetitious, tiring work, conducted with an informality not found in the big ship Navy.
We had to be in uniform going in and out of port. But as soon as you got outside of the harbor, we generally changed clothes. Usually, we changed into a bathing suit, and that was the uniform of the day.
In 1967, market time forces conducted 538,000 inspections, but intercepted few arms and supplies. Still, it was regarded as a success.
That effort was very successful and is probably one of the driving factors to the building of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which sucked up maybe 100,000 soldiers to build that trail and to keep it moving.
The supplies moving south on the trail were distributed via rivers and canals. The Navy's riverine forces were sent to stop them. Later, the swift boats would join them. But the Swifties of market time faced other dangers. The seas off Vietnam could be vicious.
We would fall off a 30-foot wave into the trough, and the fathometer would go from 30 feet to 2 feet. And I can remember getting back to the base on many occasions and urinating blood just from the pounding.
Sterling Harris was based at Qua Viet, one of the most treacherous stretches of coast. The pounding seas there had sunk 2 boats. Sterling came close.
And one day we were bringing our boat in, and a wave just caught us, just came out of nowhere, picked us up, and it was like going on a Nantucket sleigh ride, and we started to broach going left like this. I had the port engine full ahead, starboard engine full astern, boat was just shuddering, full right rudder, and we just hung there like that, and my gunner in the tub above, he said I could have reached out and touched the water.
The base was even more dangerous. Qua Viet was considered possibly the worst place in Vietnam. It was within easy range of enemy artillery and was shelled almost daily.
And it's a pretty frightening feeling just sitting there in the bottom of your bunker. You can't shoot back. You just sit there huddled in the sand and hoping to hell that they don't hit you.
There were security problems at other bases. Lee Fry was stationed at Quinh Nhan, about midway up the coast. You can see the trouble in his pictures of the base. It's surrounded by hills covered with thick brush. Perfect cover for the Viet Cong. In November 1967, they blew up an oil tank. A few nights before Christmas, they came back.
Throwing grenades, actually throwing open the doors of the hooches and running down through the middle of the hooches, shooting into beds. They'd have 2 guys would run through the hooch, one shooting in one direction, one shooting in the other direction. It was really bad.
One of Lee's crewmen was killed trying to organize resistance.
Carl Goodfellow was my engineman on the boat. The next morning, we felt there were possibly some wounded VC that were inside our perimeter. We just sort of lined up in a line and started marching out across the hillside.
Lee had made it to this rock.
This burst of gunfire came from down below, this rock in the brush, and just shot the carbine right out of my hand. I can still see it flying up in the air, sort of a cloud of blood and this carbine doing twirls as it clattered back down over the rock.
The others shot the Viet Cong. For the action, Lee received a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, but he lost one finger and part of another. A few days later, fingers still bandaged, he posed with a friend and the weapon that had shot him. For being so small, the Swift boats were fairly heavily armed. Besides the mortar, there was a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on top of it.
Put it into your stomach so that it wouldn't ride up on you. You could really control. See how he's just moving it back and forth? It works really well.
There were 2 more .50 caliber machine guns in what was called the gun tub above the pilot house.
You have to double cock it. Get around it. And it slams on.
An M60 machine gunner fired from a hatch up forward. And borrowing a page from his days as an exchange door gunner with the 1st Air Cav, Lee Fry hung 2 more M60s from bungee cords in the doors of the pilot house. Between the noise from the engines and the noise from the guns, most Swifties suffered some hearing loss. But even after 25 years, there was one sound they had no trouble picking out.
Oh, look, a Huey for us, too.
Yeah.
All right.
No sound like a Huey, is there?
I'll tell you, this takes you back. That sound and these boats.
The pH of your stomach drops about 2 points.
That's right. That's right. You
No good news
never
ever
forget
came
that
from
sound.
a helicopter. Either you were in trouble or somebody else was.
When the Swifties joined the Brown Water Navy in the rivers, the guns and the Hueys would be their best friends. The small PBRs were already there to prevent the infiltration.
The former amphibious craft that had been heavily armored were sent there to carry the elements of the 9th Division around, recapturing territory. By the time I got there, those several missions had all been accomplished, and I put the 3 different types of craft together in order to blockade the Cambodian border and stop the infiltration across the border into Vietnam from Cambodia.
The plan was centered in the southern part of the country and was codenamed Sea Lords. It began in October 1968, only a month after Admiral Zumwalt arrived in Vietnam. Here, in many cases, there were no roads. Everything and everybody moved by water on a maze of rivers, canals, and channels that crisscrossed the area. Policing it was a big order.
Well, a typical mission there was we would usually go down with 2 crews in one boat, and we would operate off of an LST that patrolled off the coast because we didn't have any friendly bases to operate of down there.
From the mothership, we'd have 1 crew get on and take it out for 24 hours and then come back, rearm and refuel, and the boat would go out for another 24 hours. We'd run 20 days straight that way, 24 hours on, 24 off.
Much of the work again involved stopping junks and sampans searching for enemy supplies.
Actually, they were pretty good at it, and it wasn't that we found so much, it's that we really thought we were pretty effective in preventing them from using that because they knew that our patrols were effective. So it forced them to take the harder routes.
But here it was different. Much of this territory was Viet Cong, and the swift boats were on the offensive.
We were part of the first contingent of 11 swift boats that went in the South China Sea side, ran the rivers, and came out the Gulf of Thailand side. That day we spotted 11 BC flags. The action was not very heavy that day, but that was about the only time it wasn't hot down there.
We get some intelligence that there was a particular concentration of enemy forces, usually Viet Cong or regular North Vietnamese forces. Find the river we were going to go up, usually a little canal, go charging up there, come in with the sun at our backs if we were lucky. It would be a frantic, intense, extremely exciting 10 or 15 minutes of absolute stark terror. We'd engage the enemy, there'd be a fairly vicious firefight involved, and then we'd get out.
We were literally drawing ambushes on many occasions. We'd fight the ambush and come out, or we'd insert troops. We'd put SEALs in a lot at night. We'd set ambushes. Went into Cambodia a couple of times, took CIA in, people like that.
It was extremely dangerous duty, operating in canals sometimes not much wider than the boats, or in the tangled swamps around the shipping channel to Saigon. The Rong Sat Special Operations Area was nicknamed the Forest of Assassins. But there was another war, the fight for the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese. Supplies and medical care delivered to countless villages. Friendly people in a beautiful country.
Very green, very lush. Pretty. You almost wondered why there was a war going on.
The paradox of going from trying to help a little girl, for example, in one case whose father was a leper, trying to help her navigate a boat on into safety, and then the next day you'd be in something fairly serious.
The
firefight, from the first time the round comes up, we first get incoming, it's incredibly fast. You're in autopilot.
Receiving heavy automatic weapons fire, vicinity of evasion. Request a scramble Seawolves, over.
For a PBR or swift boat in trouble, salvation often came at the hands of the Sea Wolves, Huey helicopters that could be on the scene in minutes. The Swifties received more Purple Hearts than any other Navy surface unit in the war. John Carey alone won 3. Jim Thomas was wounded in a night battle during Tet.
What I can remember was just this gigantic flash, and I was knocked down, and I got up and kept firing.
Later, he relieved his crewmate driving the boat.
He looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" And he shined a red lens flashlight, and I had a piece of shrapnel in my eye. They took me out to the Coast Guard cutter, end of Skagen, and the lieutenant commander doctor pulled the shrapnel out of my eye. And one of my regrets of the Vietnam War, I have several, but one of them was that I don't remember the guy's name, because I'd just like to thank him.
The morning of the second day. The last river run had stopped overnight at the Navy base in Dahlgren, Virginia.
Uh-oh. Now we're in trouble. He's down there.
I used to spend a lot of hours down there with my engineman. My other crew members didn't know anything about engines, so the engineman and I were usually down there doing the troubleshooting when we had problems.
You're glad you're not got this one going.
And I'm an engineer, so digging around down there and smelling that diesel oil brought back real memories.
The final leg of the trip to Washington would take 4 hours. The last hurrah for the Swift boats, and every one of these guys knew it.
Oh, baby, it feels great. Yeah, still got it. Still got it. The skipper still got it. Well, you sure are a story bunch of looking guys.
Each of the Swifties has his own story, but none is more unusual than that of Sterling Harris.
Well, when I was in college, I became a conscientious objector.
He moved to Canada and renounced his U.S. citizenship, but a year and a half later had a change of heart.
The funny thing, the country didn't want to let me back in. I had to agree to enlist, and then when a very good friend of mine was killed in Vietnam, I decided I wanted to know what it was really all about, and I volunteered for Swift boats.
Here she is. That baby flew in Vietnam on our boat. If you look back at the rooster tail now, it's only about 10 yards behind us. It used to be about 50 yards. These things are so fast, we go up alongside destroyers in the South China Sea. They thought we were bumboats. We went after ice cream from them, but in turn we get lobster.
Smells good, tastes bad.
You're talking about nuke bombs.
Too many memories coming back here.
We had to go alongside that boat and give them an idea of what a board and search was like. We could go alongside PCF-1 and board and search it.
It's a contraband, right?
Yeah, right.
Who's going to frisk the senator?
They call their ice cream.
For the Swifties, the present drifted away. It was no longer the Potomac River, but the Sonondak, or the South China Sea. The year was 1968. They were 25 again, and it was time to go surfing.
Remember how to do it after all these years?
Well, did you get wet? I guess I do.
That boy driving, his call sign's a Chinese bandit. Like this, it was dry in 5 minutes.
I wanted to make sure you knew how it really felt.
My hat will shrink 2 sizes. Rocking and rolling like the old days.
Vietnam had been an angry and divisive time in America, and each of these men had to deal not only with fighting the war, but with the effect it had on them and their nation.
Well, coming back was a pretty tough experience because back then the country hadn't learned to separate the warrior from the war. And I very quickly realized that we shouldn't be here and we shouldn't be fighting this war. And I went from fighting for God and country, for fighting for my crew, and to make sure that we just got home safe and sound.
I can remember getting spit at in San Francisco and called baby killer.
But Jim Thomas remembers another incident too. He was eating breakfast in Chicago near a woman and her daughter.
And the woman says, well, where are you stationed at? And I said, ma'am, it's the happiest day of my life. I just got discharged from the Navy. I'm going home. I've just got back from Vietnam. And she picks up my check. I said, excuse me, but that's my check. And she says, I just want to say thank you and buy you breakfast.
Senator John Kerry won a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts. But the war led him to enter politics.
I think that those of us who went through that period of time became very suspicious of government, very reluctant to simply be told things. We learned that we were not told the truth all the time. We learned that people were willing to be expedient, sometimes with your life.
I went back last June to Vietnam, and it was just truly good for the soul. 70% of the people in Vietnam were born after our war. I encountered absolutely no animosity at all in the country. Lovely people, nice smiles, and the Viets were truly ready to put it all behind them. It may come as a surprise to many Americans, but to the Vietnamese, they've fought with the Chinese, with the Cambodians, they've fought with the French, and to Americans, we're just one more.
As the boats approached Washington, there was one final duty to perform. Naval tradition calls for honors to be rendered at Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. And for today, at least, all the Swifties were back in the Navy. The small flotilla had now only a few miles to go. The two swift boats and their escort for the trip, the Point Bonita, an 82-foot Coast Guard patrol boat, just like the ones with which they had served in Vietnam. After Mount Vernon, things got quiet. The Swifties drifted off by themselves. Perhaps it was knowing the last river run was nearly over, and with it, their last mission on a swift boat. Or maybe it was the memories of friends who couldn't make this trip, fellow Swifties who didn't come back. Maybe it was knowing that the last river run really wouldn't be over without one final stop.
I went on R&R late February 1970. When I came back, the first week in March, one of the friends at the sport base came up and said, "No, Bill's gone."
Dick Simons is the one that I really remember. I saw him get it. He got a sniper round right between the eyes.
Carl was a second-class engineman. He had been in Vietnam down at An Toi in the southern part of Vietnam for a full year and had extended for, I think, another 6 months. He only had about 30 days left before that 6-month extension was over and he was headed home.
I don't think you ever reconcile the loss of a human life. I don't think I ever reconciled the loss of John McDermott, who was my brother and one of my best friends. When a beautiful person dies in a situation like that violently, I think you try to find some meaning in it. I think the meaning for him was he was doing exactly what he wanted to do at the time he died.
The young men that came to those boats were America's best. They were not only volunteers to join the Navy, but they volunteered again separately to go to Vietnam. They're the most courageous young men I've ever served with.
With the two swift boats in Washington, Swifties from all over showed up with their families for one last ride, a quick trip back to the old days. John Kerry came back with members of his Senate staff, and of course, he drove. But the one man almost everyone wanted most to see again technically wasn't even a Swiftie.
God bless you. Thank you.
Retired Admiral Zumwalt was the Navy commander in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970. He sent the swift boats into the rivers and great danger. but he earned the undying admiration of his men.
He really looked out for us. We were told we were fighting the 512th NVA Battalion down up the Bodie River. That's what we were told. And he'd be out there slugging it out, and next thing you know, he's in a chopper 500 feet above you directing traffic.
Zumwalt was famous, or notorious, for hopping on his helicopter and going where the action was. He once visited Keith Evans' boat.
When he came aboard, he went over to one of my crewmen who had been wounded maybe a week before and asked him how he was doing, asked him to show us just where on the boat we had taken some damage. Of course, he was well briefed, but he took the time to be briefed, and I think that's what I remember most about him.
He also violated policy and joined a swift boat crew for a night mission in the Delta. He got in trouble, but insisted it was the only way he could understand what his men faced.
I don't think that you can get closer to anyone than you get close to your comrades in war. Because I had the responsibility of sending those young men into those dangerous areas, and to lose some of them, I have always felt a very tremendous bond.
But the bond was closest with one young swift boat officer named Elmo Zumwalt III. His son had volunteered for duty in Vietnam.
He volunteered to come after I was there. The Bureau of Naval Personnel inquired as to whether or not I was willing to have him come. He took the precaution of sending me a letter telling me not to interfere. I sent his letter to the Bureau and said, it looks like that's the answer.
Once in Vietnam, he volunteered for the most dangerous duty. He and his 35 boat patrolled the enemy-infested waters of the Delta. Billy Nairmore was part of the crew and took these home movies.
We'd go out and sit under the banks of the bushes and get them put over the boats and sort of hide. And occasionally they would try to cross, and that was our job, prevent them from doing that, moving the supplies across. We have gotten several NVA coming out of Cambodia one night, and we hit them pretty good, and their supplies and themselves were in the water. And after the shooting all ceased, Elmo said, he jumped in the water and says, give me a battle lantern, I'm gonna go check it out. Well, a lot of officers might have said, picked a couple of people to go check it out for him. No, he was gonna go check it out himself. Pretty terrific guy. He really took care of his people and kept us on our toes, and that's probably one reason I'm here today.
Operating in the narrow canals and rivers was extraordinarily dangerous. Ambushes could come from only a few feet away, from underbrush so thick the Swifties might never even see their attackers. So Admiral Zumwalt ordered the chemical defoliation of the riverbanks. In Operation Ranch Hand, planes sprayed thousands of acres. It worked. In those areas, casualties among boat crews dropped dramatically.
I can remember one instance when the plane flew over and sprayed, and of course we got some of the mist down on us, and I remember making a comment to Elmo that it's about time they did something about this mosquito problem.
The chemical used came in drums marked with an orange stripe. It got the nickname Agent Orange. Later, it would be identified as a deadly carcinogen, and by the mid-'80s, the younger Zumwalt was fighting for his life. He and his father wrote an emotional account of the battle in this book, but it was one battle he couldn't win. For his father, who had ordered the spraying, Agent Orange had hit close to home.
Yes, it did, although his family is now provided for because the two diseases from which he succumbed, Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's, have been made compensable. But we've got another 18 diseases to go beyond the 10 that are now recognized.
This is Elmo Zumwalt's on his boat. Of course, I was a member on Elmo's boat. This is the original flag off the 35 boat down the seafloat. It stays at home, and on Memorial Day and things like that, I'll flag this for a short period of time for Elmo and all those that have died for the cause over there.
They had a 10K race 3 weeks after his son passed away. So I went down there and ran the 10K race, and he was Grand Marshal of it. And I went up to him and said, Admiral, I was in Antioch, would you sign the book? Antioch was where his son was stationed at. And I told him the story that was in the book about how he would go out and be flying above the helicopters, but there wasn't anything in the book about him landing on the LST and getting his pictures taken. So I mentioned that, and he said, wait a minute, you were there, weren't you? So he wrote to Jim Thomas, Comrade in Arms, Elmo Zumwalt. You can't buy that book from me.
On June 17th, the museum director at the Washington Navy Yard accepted documents turning over to him PCF-1, the first and one of the last 2 Swift boats. For some of the vets, it was closure for a chapter in their lives begun more than a quarter century ago. Chapters written with different experiences and often confused feelings, but ones which today would all have the same conclusion, written together as brothers in arms.
The times we lobbed raw eggs from boat to boat, the great flare fights that we had, ultimately lighting Bill Rood's life raft on fire, delivering lumber to Namcan in the middle of the war, the ridiculous PSYOPs packages which nobody understood, which we handed out, and of course, pet dogs that didn't understand English or Vietnamese for "don't do it there." And we exulted in the beauty of a country that took us from glorious green rice paddy, black water buffalo caressing the banks of rivers, children giggling and playing on dikes, sampans filled with produce going to market, that suddenly took us from innocence and tranquility deep into the madness of firefights, chaos reigning around us, 50 calibers diminishing our hearing, screams for medevac piercing the radio waves, fishtailing rockets passing the pilot house, all suddenly to be replaced by the most serene, eerie beauty the eye could behold, and an awesome sense of survival.
Today is another step in the direction of binding up the wounds and putting that war behind us. The symbol that will exist with the placement of this swift boat will be to symbolize the courage, the initiative, the imagination, the sheer guts of the remarkable crews that sailed and steamed in that craft.
The ones who came home, and especially the ones who didn't.
Quartermaster Second Class Lanny Baroff, Gunner's Mate Stephen Penta, Lieutenant J.G. Robert L. Crosby, Bosun Mate Third Class John McDermott. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. And I dreamed I saw a mighty room, and the room was filled with men. And the paper they were signing said, we'd never fight again. And when the paper was all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and prayerful prayers were prayed. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end